I'm writing this from my apartment in Minneapolis, watching snow fall past my third-floor window while clutching a mug of coffee that went cold an hour ago. The cursor on my laptop screen blinks, waiting for me to finally get this down in words. I've started this document 17 times in the past 14 months, and each time I've chickened out, closed the file, and tried to convince myself that sharing this won't make it more real. But it's already as real as anything gets. More real, maybe, than the city bus I can hear rumbling past outside or the neighbor's television bleeding through the wall. My name is Lee Harmon. I'm 34 years old, and until January 2024, I was someone who had everything figured out. I worked as a remote IT consultant from my house in Duluth. Good money, flexible hours, the kind of setup where I could take calls from bed if I wanted to. My partner Morgan and I had been together for 6 years, talking about maybe getting married, maybe buying something bigger than our cramped duplex with a view of Lake Superior. I spent my weekends hiking, my winters cross-country skiing through the state parks, my evenings reading thriller novels and rolling my eyes at the supernatural elements, ghosts, cryptids, conspiracies. They all fell into the same category in my mind. Things people believed in because they needed mystery in their lives, because the real world wasn't exciting enough, because they saw a bear on its hind legs in bad lighting, and their brain filled in the rest. I was so fucking smug about it too. I remember this forum thread from maybe 3 years ago. Some guy claiming he'd seen a Wendigo near the Canadian border. I'd spent 20 minutes drafting a response about pareidolia and how eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, how our pattern recognition software, the human brain, evolved to see predators in every shadow because false positives kept our ancestors alive. I'd signed off with something condescending like, maybe spend less time reading creepypasta and more time studying actual wildlife. Morgan had read it over my shoulder and laughed, kissed the top of my head, told me I was such a nerd. I'd give anything to be that person again. The one who knew better, the one who had explanations. The wind off Lake Superior rattles my current window. The one in Minneapolis, not Duluth, because I don't live there anymore and I can't ever go back. And I pull up the folder of photos on my laptop. There it is. The cabin listing from January 2024. Secluded winter retreat on the Gunflint Trail, the header reads. Perfect for those seeking solitude and natural beauty. The photos show exactly what it promised. A compact, well-maintained log cabin with a green metal roof, surrounded by towering pines heavy with snow. A woodpile stacked neatly on the covered porch. Windows glowing warm yellow in the twilight shot. It looked like something from a Christmas card. It looked perfect. I'd booked it for 2 weeks. In mid-January, right after the New Year chaos had died down and before Morgan's busy season started at the hospital. We'd talked about going together, but Morgan had just covered 3 double shifts during the holidays and needed real rest. Not a freezing cabin 40 miles from the nearest gas station. Besides, I'd wanted solo time. Space to think. I'd been doing the wilderness thing since I was 16. I knew how to handle myself in the cold, how to read weather patterns, how to stay calm if something went wrong. I had a satellite phone, old model, but it worked. A first aid kit that could handle anything short of a sucking chest wound, bear spray, because I wasn't stupid about wildlife, a flare gun for emergencies, and enough freeze-dried meals to last a month if I rationed them. "You sure you don't want company?" Morgan had asked while I'd packed. leaning against the bedroom door frame with that concerned look I knew so well. It's going to be cold as hell up there. That's the point, I'd said, rolling up my thermal underwear. 2 weeks of nobody asking me to fix their printer, nobody's Netflix password crisis, just me and the trees, and the wolves, and the cold, and your charming personality to keep you company. I'd laughed. We'd kissed goodbye. Morgan had made me promise to check in every couple of days via the satellite phone, and I'd promised, and I'd meant it. I'd left my hunting rifle at home. I was going for peace and quiet, not to shoot anything. That decision would haunt me. I wish I'd never left. I wish I'd listened to the small voice that said 2 weeks alone was too long, that something felt off about how cheap the rental was, that the owner's voice had sounded just slightly wrong when I'd called to confirm, but I didn't listen. I was Lee Harmon, experienced winter camper, rational thinker, person who didn't believe in bad feelings or intuition or any of that mystical bullshit. I can still remember the drive up. 7 hours from Duluth, watching the landscape gradually empty of civilization. The last real town was Grand Marais, where I'd stopped for gas and coffee at a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987. Then another 40 miles up the Gunflint Trail, a winding 2-lane road that cut through Superior National Forest like a scar through white velvet. The pines got denser, the houses got sparser, then disappeared entirely. My phone lost signal around mile 30, and even the radio stations faded to static. The turnoff to the cabin was marked by a weathered wooden sign that said, Nordstrom Access Road, private. I'd bumped down 3 miles of unplowed track in my Subaru, snow chains crunching, branches scraping the roof, until the cabin materialized from the trees like something from a dream. It was perfect. God help me, it was absolutely perfect. The photos hadn't done it justice. The cabin sat in a small clearing, maybe 50 yards across, with forest pressing in on all sides like a green and white wall. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. The owner had started a fire before I'd arrived, bless him, and the late afternoon sun slanted through the pines in those dusty golden beams that photographers spend years trying to capture. The air smelled like wood smoke and pine resin and the particular clean emptiness that only comes with deep snow and distance from humanity. I'd stood outside my car for 5 minutes, just breathing it in, listening to the profound silence. No traffic, no voices, no mechanical hum of civilization. Just wind in the branches and the occasional creak of trees settling under their snow load. The first 3 days were exactly what I'd needed. I'd wake with the sun late this far north, around 8 a.m., and start the day with coffee on the porch, watching chickadees work the feeder the owner had left stocked. I'd work for 4 or 5 hours, knocking out tickets for my clients, then spend the afternoons on my cross-country skis, breaking trail through the untracked snow. The cabin's location put me near the edge of the Boundary Waters Canoe area, which meant hundreds of square miles of designated wilderness, frozen lakes like sheets of glass, and the kind of solitude that feels almost holy when you're in the right headspace. The northern lights came out on the second night. I'd stood in the clearing wearing every layer I owned, temperature somewhere around 10 degrees, watching curtains of green and purple shimmer across the sky. I tried to photograph them with my phone, but the camera couldn't capture it, couldn't catch that sense of witnessing something ancient and eternal, something that had been happening long before humans came to these woods and would continue long after we were gone. I'd felt so small in the best way, so connected to something larger, so grateful to be alive. In that exact moment. On the third day, I'd skied 5 miles east to a frozen lake I'd spotted on the topo map, following a creek bed through terrain that probably hadn't seen another human in months. The snow was perfect. That squeaky, crystalline kind that only happens in serious cold. And my skis left clean tracks behind me like a signature on blank paper. I'd seen wolf tracks near the lake, and the partially consumed carcass of a deer. And I'd given them both a wide berth because I knew wolves and I knew how to share space with them. They didn't want anything to do with me, they were just living their lives in a place I was visiting. That's what I believed then, that I was the visitor, that the predators here were known quantities, wolves, the occasional bear, maybe a cougar if I was extremely unlucky. Things that made sense. Things that fit into the framework of ecological reality. The cabin itself was cozy in a way that my Duluth duplex never quite managed. Stone fireplace with a wood stove, insert that radiated heat like a small sun. Loft bedroom with a skylight for stargazing. Kitchen stocked with basic supplies and a propane stove that worked perfectly. Shelves of dog-eared paperbacks and board games for people who came here with company. A guest book on the coffee table where previous renters had left entries. Perfect getaway. Saw 3 owls and a fox. Will definitely return next winter. I'd added my own entry on the third night. Exactly the reset I needed. Best decision I've made in years. I've thought about that line a lot in the months since. How confidently I'd written it. How sure I'd been. On the 4th morning, everything changed. I'd gone to bed around 10 p.m., exhausted from another long ski, warm and satisfied in my loft bedroom with the wood stove crackling below. The forecast had called for snow overnight, 3 to 4 inches, and I'd fallen asleep to the profound quiet that comes just before a snowfall when the world seems to hold its breath. I'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who felt completely safe. When I'd woken around 7 a.m., the first thing I'd noticed was the quality of light through the skylight. Fresh snow always creates a particular brightness. Sunlight reflecting off new white in a way that makes everything glow. I'd climbed down from the loft, started the coffee, and opened the front door to check how much had fallen. The cold hit me first. Temperature had dropped to maybe 5 degrees. Then the beauty. 4 inches of pristine snow, blanketing everything, transforming the clearing into something from a fairy tale. My car was a smooth white mound. The woodpile wore a peaked cap. The trees bowed under their fresh burden. And then I saw the tracks. They circled the cabin. That was the first thing I understood, standing there in the doorway with my coffee mug cooling in my hand, breath fogging in the morning air. Whatever had made these tracks had walked in concentric circles around the cabin. 3 distinct rings that I could see from my vantage point, each one at a different distance. The innermost ring came within maybe 10 feet of the porch. The outermost disappeared into the tree line. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and stepped into my boots, not bothering to lace them. The snow crunched under my feet, that particular squeak that means serious cold, molecules of ice crystals compacting, and I walked to the nearest track. It was huge, 18 inches long easily, maybe closer to 20. At first glance, it looked almost like a human footprint if a human had feet the size of snowshoes. But the proportions were wrong. Too narrow at the heel, too wide at what should have been the toe bed. And there, I crouched down, my knees protesting the cold. Those weren't toes. Those were claw marks. 4 of them. Deep gouges in the snow, extending beyond the main print. My brain immediately started working the problem, running through possibilities the way I'd run through diagnostic trees when a client's network went down. Wolf tracks, maybe. Wolves had been in the area. I'd seen evidence just 2 days ago. But wolves didn't walk in circles. They didn't have a gait pattern that showed a stride of... I stood up and walked to the next print. 6 feet. Nearly 6 feet between steps. I followed the innermost circle, my breath coming faster now, and not just from the cold. The tracks were perfect. Crisp edges, clear definition. No wind distortion or melting, despite the relatively warm morning. Whatever had made them had been here recently. After the snow stopped, which according to the accumulation had been maybe 2 hours before I woke up, which meant whatever this was had been circling my cabin in the dark, in the hours just before dawn while I'd been asleep in the loft, with nothing but a wooden door and some windows between us. The silence hit me then. I'd been so focused on the tracks that I hadn't registered it, but now it crashed over me like a wave. No bird calls. The chickadees that had been mobbing the feeder every morning were gone. No squirrels chittering in the trees. No sound at all except my own breathing and the faint whisper of wind through pine branches. I completed the circuit of the inner ring, then moved to the middle one. Same tracks, same spacing. Like something had been observing the cabin from different vantage points, studying it. I didn't like that thought. Didn't like the intelligence it implied. A smell caught my attention near one of the prints in the outer ring. Something chemical and wrong, like ammonia mixed with rotting vegetation. I knelt again, careful not to get too close, and inhaled. The scent was definitely coming from the tracks. Not a natural smell, not wolf, not bear. Nothing I'd encountered in 16 years of wilderness experience. Bears, I thought desperately. It had to be bears. Sometimes they woke up during warm spells, confused and hungry. But it was January and 5 degrees at night, and no bear had feet that left tracks like this. No bear walked in perfect circles. I pulled out my phone and took photos. Even though I knew the images wouldn't capture the scale, the wrongness of them, my hands were shaking from the cold, I told myself, just the cold. Back inside, I pulled up every wildlife identification resource I could find on my laptop. The satellite Wi-Fi was slow, but eventually images loaded. Bear tracks, round, clear toe pads, claw marks straight ahead. Not a match. Wolf tracks, smaller, more elongated, clear X pattern in the pad. Not a match. Moose, cloven hooves, elk, same, I was being ridiculous. There had to be an explanation. Wolves with some kind of deformity. Snowdrift patterns that just looked like tracks. Some perfectly logical reason that I was too cold and too amped up on adrenaline to see clearly. I drank my coffee cold, staring out the window at the tracks. By noon, I'd almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. By 2 p.m., I'd decided they were probably wolf prints, distorted by the snow settling. By 4 p.m., when I went out to get firewood, they'd started to blur with wind drift, and I felt relieved. My imagination had gotten the better of me. That was all. That night, I slept fine. The following night, I woke to footsteps on the roof. The sound pulled me out of sleep at 2:17 a.m. I know because I grabbed my phone immediately, thumb finding the flashlight icon with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent too many years on call for IT emergencies. The light showed the sloped ceiling of the loft, exposed beams. Nothing unusual. But the footsteps continued, heavy, deliberate, moving from the peak of the roof toward the eaves, directly above my head. Something walking on the cabin's metal roof with enough weight that I could hear each step clearly, could feel the slight vibration through the structure. I lay perfectly still, heart hammering, telling myself it was a branch. A large branch had fallen on the roof, and the wind was rolling it back and forth. That was all. But the sounds didn't move like a rolling branch. They moved like footsteps. They paused above my skylight for a long moment. I could see the stars through the glass, see nothing blocking them, then continued to the far end of the cabin. Then they stopped. I waited in the darkness, my phone's flashlight beam steady on the ceiling for something else to happen. Nothing did. After 20 minutes, I convinced myself I'd half dreamed it, that the cabin was settling under its snow load, that old buildings made sounds. But I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, there were more tracks, fresh ones in the 2 inches of powder that had fallen overnight. The same circling pattern, but tighter now, closer. And this time there were marks on the woodpile, deep scratches in the bark of the logs, like something had dragged claws across them, not randomly, deliberately, in parallel lines that were too uniform to be accidental. The next night the scratching started. It began around midnight. I was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, trying to work on a ticket, but mostly just staring at the screen without seeing it. The scratching came from the north wall. Slow, methodical scraping sounds, like someone dragging their fingernails down the exterior logs. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window, pressing my face against the glass to look out. Nothing. Just darkness and falling snow. But the scratching continued, moving along the wall toward the corner. I followed it inside, going from window to window trying to see what was making the sound. At the back window, the scratching stopped. I stood there with my flashlight beam bouncing uselessly off my own reflection in the dark glass, breathing hard, telling myself this was an animal behavior I didn't understand. Porcupines, maybe. Did porcupines scratch buildings? I didn't know. I was from the city originally. Duluth was urban compared to this. My wilderness experience was trails and campsites, not true isolation. Then I heard it. Low. Resonant. Coming from somewhere outside but impossible to pinpoint. A vocalization that my brain couldn't categorize. It wasn't a howl, too controlled for that. It wasn't a bugle, too low. It sounded like someone had recorded an elk call and a human groan, played them simultaneously, then pitched the whole thing down into a register that made my chest vibrate. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, the satellite phone on the table in front of me. I'd tried it twice already that night. Nothing but static. The screen showed signal bars that flickered and died, no matter how I positioned it. Even if it had worked, what would I say? I'm scared of sounds outside. I found weird tracks. I'd sound insane. When dawn finally came, I went outside with my flashlight even though the sun was rising. The scratches were there on the north wall, deep gouges in the wood, 4 parallel lines, exactly at what would be eye level for someone 7 feet tall. And on the woodpile, arranged on top of the stacked logs, was a deer carcass. Not scattered by predation, not torn apart. Placed. The body was intact except for the throat, which had been opened with surgical precision. The deer's eyes were still open, filmed over with death, staring at nothing. But what made my stomach turn was the position. It had been laid out almost reverently, legs straight, head positioned to face the cabin door. There was no blood on the woodpile, no blood in the snow leading to it, no drag marks, just the deer, placed there like an offering or a warning or a promise. The smell hit me then, the sweet rot stench of death mixed with something else, that same chemical wrongness I'd smelled in the tracks. My gorge rose and I stumbled away, making it to the far corner of the porch, before I vomited my coffee and the protein bar I'd forced down at dawn. When I could breathe again, I went inside and locked the door. All the doors, the windows. I checked every lock twice, knowing they were inadequate, knowing a wooden door wouldn't stop anything that could carry a full-grown deer and place it silently on a woodpile in the middle of the night. That day, I tried to work, stared at my laptop, responded to 2 emails, accomplished nothing. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. Every shadow at the periphery of my vision sent my heart racing. I set up my phone to record overnight, propped on the kitchen counter, lens facing the front windows and door. If something was out there, I'd capture it. I'd have proof, evidence I could show to someone. Morgan, the authorities, myself. The night after that, I forced myself to go to bed at 11. I lay in the loft with my phone in my hand, checking the recording app every few minutes. The battery was full. The storage was clear. It was recording. At 1:43 a.m., the sounds started again. Heavier this time. Not footsteps on the roof, but something moving around the cabin's perimeter, close to the walls. I could hear it breathing, deep, rattling breaths that echoed the rhythm of my own panicked breathing. Then the scratching returned, but on multiple walls simultaneously, as if whatever was out there had multiplied or grown extra limbs. I didn't go to investigate. I stayed in the loft, frozen, listening to the sounds circle the cabin for the next 3 hours until dawn. In the morning, I grabbed my phone and checked the recording with shaking hands. The audio was there. I could hear everything. The breathing, the scratching, that terrible vocalization, longer this time, almost like it was calling to something. But the video showed nothing, just static, pure white static during every moment when sounds appeared on the audio track, then clear video of the empty cabin interior once the sounds stopped. I watched it 4 times, my chest getting tighter with each viewing. Technical glitch, camera malfunction, electromagnetic interference. There were explanations. There had to be. Except I'd recorded test footage before bed, and it had worked perfectly. The small items started moving on the porch that same day. My spare pair of boots, which I'd left by the door, were lined up perfectly parallel. My ice scraper, which had been on the porch railing, was now on the welcome mat, positioned perpendicular to the doorway. My firewood carrier had been moved from the left side of the porch to the right. Nothing was broken, nothing was taken, just rearranged. The satellite phone had been useless since the 4th night. Nothing but static whenever I tried it. Whatever was out there seemed to interfere with electronics. My phone, my camera, now the sat phone. The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Solar activity, atmospheric conditions, damaged equipment. But another part of me, the part I was trying not to listen to, knew better. That night, the 5th since I'd found those first tracks, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a knife from the block on the table in front of me, a ridiculous gesture, I knew, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. The scratching came again, the breathing, the footsteps on the roof, and shadows at the windows. I saw them from the corner of my eye. Tall, wrong shapes that shouldn't exist, that disappeared when I turned to look directly. My rational mind screamed that this was exhaustion, that I was hallucinating from lack of sleep and stress and isolation. But the scratch marks were real. The moved items were real, like the deer carcass was real, rotting now, filling the clearing with the stench of decay that somehow mixed with that chemical smell until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. By morning, I knew I had to make a decision. I checked the weather service on my laptop, and my stomach dropped. A massive storm system was moving in from the northwest. The logging road would be impassable within hours. I was stuck until at least the following afternoon, whether I liked it or not. Still, I told myself I could use the time, or I could hunker down, wait it out, and leave the moment the road cleared. Proved that there was a rational explanation. Gather evidence. Be the experienced outdoorsman I'd always claimed to be. Pride is a dangerous thing. So is the human need to understand, to categorize, to make sense of chaos. I decided to stay one more day, just one. I'd gather firewood to keep the cabin warm, document everything I could, then leave in the morning regardless of what happened that night. That afternoon, I went out to gather wood from the stack I'd noticed on my first ski, about 50 yards into the forest, where a previous resident must have cut and stacked pine that had been dead too long to use this season but would be good for emergencies. The sky was already dimming to that flat winter gray that came by 4 p.m. this far north. I had maybe an hour of good light. I loaded my arms with logs, the bark rough and cold even through my gloves, and turned back toward the cabin. That's when I saw it. Standing at the tree line, motionless as a photograph, was a figure. My first thought was that someone else was out here. Another hiker, a hunter, someone I could talk to and feel connected to humanity again. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost called out a greeting. Then my eyes adjusted and I understood what I was seeing, and everything went cold. It was tall, 7 feet, maybe 8. It was hard to judge distance. The posture was wrong, bent forward slightly at the waist, like something imitating a human stance but not quite getting it right. The arms were too long, hanging past where knees should be on a human frame. The head was too narrow, elongated, though I couldn't make out details at this distance. It was covered in something dark. Fur or matted hair, I couldn't tell. But the face was pale. Gray pale, like old meat. And it was watching me. We made eye contact. I don't know how else to describe the next moment except to say that my brain tried to reject what it was seeing, tried to convert the image into something that made sense. A person in a costume, a weirdly shaped tree, a hallucination brought on by stress. But my hindbrain, the part of me that remembered being prey, knew exactly what I was looking at. Predator. The thought was crystal clear. Predator that has been watching you for days. The creature didn't move, didn't blink. Its eyes caught the fading light and reflected it back at me like an animal's eyes, but with something behind them that no animal's eyes had ever held. Something that was watching me think. I don't remember deciding to run, my body just did it. The firewood fell from my arms and scattered in the snow, and my legs carried me back toward the cabin with a speed I didn't know I possessed. The snow dragged at my boots. My lungs burned with cold air. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I looked back and saw it following, I knew I would fall, would collapse into the snow, and wait for whatever was about to happen. The cabin door was unlocked. Thank God, thank God. And I crashed through it, slamming it behind me and throwing both locks. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Then I went to every window checking locks, pulling curtains, shutting out the forest that suddenly felt hostile and alive and aware. Only then did I look outside. The tree line was empty. Whatever had been there was gone. The forest stood silent and still in the gathering dusk. But I knew what I'd seen. Finally, horribly, I knew. The walls of the cabin, which had seemed so solid and protective when I'd arrived, now felt like paper, like the thinnest barrier between me and something that didn't belong in any taxonomy I'd ever studied, didn't fit into any rational framework I'd ever constructed. It was nearly dark. The 40-mile drive to Grand Marais on icy, unplowed logging roads in the dark would be suicide. I knew that. Whatever was out there, and it was out there, I could feel it watching even now. The drive was more dangerous. I was trapped until morning, and it knew where I was. I didn't sleep. How could I? I sat on the couch downstairs with every light in the cabin blazing, the satellite phone on the cushion next to me, my pocket knife open in my trembling hand. The blade was 3 inches long. Pathetic, useless, but it was something to hold on to. Something that let me pretend I had control. Outside, the forest was silent. Too silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like water pressure, that makes you understand silence isn't the absence of sound, but a presence of its own. I kept checking my watch. 11:47 p.m., 12:23 a.m., 1:15 a.m. Time stretched and contracted in ways that felt wrong, like my perception was breaking down along with everything else I'd believed about reality. At 2:47 a.m., I heard breathing. Not the wind, not the cabin settling. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic, deliberate. Coming from the loft bedroom directly above me. My first thought was that something had gotten inside, that while I'd been sitting here, it had somehow entered through the skylight or crawled down the chimney like some nightmare version of Santa Claus. I stood up, knife gripped so hard my knuckles ached, and stared at the loft ladder. Then I realized the sound was wrong. It was coming from above me, yes, but from outside. From beyond the bedroom window. The window that was 12 feet off the ground on the outside. I should have stayed downstairs. Every survival instinct I had left was screaming at me to stay in the open room, to keep distance between myself and whatever was up there. But I couldn't. I couldn't sit here listening to that, breathing, knowing something was at my bedroom window, knowing it was waiting for me to come look, because that's what it wanted. I understood that with sudden horrible clarity. It wanted me to come. It was calling me. I climbed the ladder on legs that barely held my weight. Each rung felt like a betrayal of my own survival. The breathing got louder as I climbed. Closer. I could hear the wet quality of it now. The slight whistle in the intake. The longer exhale that fogged the cold glass. My flashlight was on the nightstand. I'd left it there when I'd fled downstairs hours ago. I forced myself to cross the loft floor, each step slow and careful, trying not to make noise even though whatever was outside clearly knew I was here. My hand closed around the flashlight's rubber grip. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I stood frozen 3 feet from the window, flashlight off, staring at the dark glass that reflected my own terrified face back at me. The window was a rectangle of black. No stars visible, no moonlight. Just darkness. Something was blocking the light. My hand moved without my permission, thumb finding the flashlight's button. The rational part of my brain was screaming not to look, to run back downstairs, to hide in the bathroom until dawn. But the part of me that had always needed to understand, to see, to know, that part was stronger. I pressed the button. The beam illuminated the window. For one heartbeat, I saw only glass, only my own reflection. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw what was pressed against the other side. A face. The creature's face was inches from the glass. Close enough that its breath had fogged a circle on the window. Close enough that I could see every detail with crystalline, horrible clarity. It was wrong in ways that made my brain stutter. The shape was elongated like a wolf's muzzle, but flatter, more human in profile. Skin stretched tight over protruding bones, cheekbones that jutted like blades, a jaw that seemed hinged wrong. The eyes were too large, too forward-facing, and they reflected my flashlight beam back at me with a golden-green shine that made my stomach drop. But behind that animal reflection was something else. Recognition. Intent. It knew what I was. The mouth was open slightly and I could see teeth. Yellowed. Too long for the jaw. Some of them broken or worn at angles that suggested they were used for more than eating. The lips pulled back farther as I watched. Almost like a smile, but not. Never a smile. We stared at each other. The creature didn't flinch from the light, didn't retreat. It held my gaze with those two aware eyes, and I felt something pass between us. Understanding, maybe. Acknowledgement. Predator and prey recognizing each other. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one long arm. I saw the hand come into view. Fingers too long, joints too many, ending in black claws that curved like fishing hooks. It placed the hand against the glass, palm flat. Claws spread, and then it dragged downward. The screech of claw on glass was inhuman. It vibrated through my teeth, through my skull. A sound that evolution had programmed my ancestors to fear. 4 parallel lines appeared in the condensation on the window. Beneath them, I could see scratches in the glass itself. Shallow, but there. It was marking the window, marking its territory, marking me. The stench hit me then. I don't know if a window had cracked, or if the smell was so powerful it penetrated the cabin's walls. But suddenly I could smell it. Rotting meat. And wet dog, and that chemical wrongness I'd smelled in the tracks, all mixed together into something that made my gorge rise. It was the smell of death, of something that had been dead and somehow wasn't. My hand moved on instinct. I dropped the flashlight and lunged for my backpack, for the flare gun I'd packed for emergencies. My fingers closed around it, pulled it free, and I was raising it toward the window before I'd even consciously decided to fire. The creature's eyes tracked the movement. Its mouth opened wider, and I saw something worse than teeth. I saw a throat that went too deep, too dark, as if the inside of this thing was bigger than the outside could hold. I pulled the trigger. The flare gun kicked in my hand. The window exploded outward in a shower of glass and light. The flare hit the creature dead center in its chest and erupted in brilliant red phosphorus fire. The shriek that followed wasn't just sound, it was physical. a wall of noise that knocked me backward. I fell hard on the loft floor, ears ringing, and through the broken window I saw the creature. It was on fire. The flare had caught in its matted fur, and flames spread across its torso in a way that fire shouldn't spread, too fast and too hungry. But the creature wasn't rolling or panicking. It was backing away from the window, upright, still maintaining eye contact even as it burned. The shriek continued, but it wasn't pain. It was rage. It was a promise. Then it dropped from sight, and I heard it hit the ground below with a wet thud that shook the cabin's foundation. I scrambled to the broken window on hands and knees, glass crunching under my palms, and looked down. The creature was there in the snow, flames still licking across its back, and as I watched it, rolled once, twice, smothering the fire. Then it stood, 8 feet tall, maybe more. The flames had burned away some of the matted fur, and I could see gray-black skin beneath, stretched over a skeletal frame that looked emaciated and powerful at the same time. Its arms hung to its knees. Its head swiveled on a neck that bent at too many angles. And it looked up at me. Our eyes met again through the broken window, and I saw something in its expression that was worse than rage or hunger. I saw patience. It knew I was trapped, knew I couldn't escape, knew that time was on its side. Then it turned and walked into the forest, moving with that strange, bent-forward gait, flames still smoldering on its back, like dying stars. I didn't remember climbing down the ladder. Didn't remember grabbing the knife and bear spray. The next thing I knew, I was in the bathroom, the only room without windows, with my back against the sink cabinet and my knees pulled to my chest. The bear spray was clutched in my right hand, knife in my left. The acrid smell of the flare clung to my clothes, mixing with my own sweat fear. I stayed there until dawn. The tile floor was freezing, leaching heat from my body through my jeans. But I couldn't move. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of the cabin settling made me raise the bear spray, finger on the trigger. Around 5 a.m., I tasted bile and leaned over to vomit in the sink. But nothing came up. Just dry heaves that left me shaking and weak. When gray light finally started showing around the bathroom door, I forced myself to stand. My legs had gone numb from sitting. I hobbled to the door, opened it slowly, and looked out at the cabin. Daylight should have brought relief. It didn't. The cabin was destroyed. Not the inside. The inside was fine except for the shattered loft window and glass everywhere. But through the remaining windows I could see the outside, and what I saw made my chest tight. The logs were gouged. Deep scratches covered every wall. I could see parallel claw marks that had torn through bark and into wood. The porch was covered in debris. The deer carcass had been torn apart, pieces scattered like a child's toys. Ribs, leg bones, a partial skull that stared at nothing with empty sockets, and tracks. Hundreds of tracks, maybe thousands. They covered the clearing in overlapping circles and figure eights, as if the creature had spent the entire night after I'd shot it, pacing around the cabin like a shark circling prey. I forced myself to the front door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and stepped outside. The cold hit like a fist. Temperature had dropped to maybe 0, and the wind carried snow crystals that stung exposed skin. But the cold was grounding. Real. I focused on it as I walked to my car on legs that felt borrowed. All 4 tires were slashed. Not punctured, slashed. Long tears in the rubber that looked like they'd been made with knives or claws. The Subaru sagged on its rims, useless. My cell phone showed no signal, not one bar, nothing. I tried the satellite phone, but it wouldn't connect. The screen showed searching no matter how long I waited. 5 miles? The neighbor's cabin was 5 miles east, following the creek drainage. I'd skied it on my second day. It had taken 90 minutes on good snow with good light. I could make it. I had to make it. I went back inside and grabbed my skis from where I'd left them propped by the door. They were snapped in half. Both of them. Clean breaks through the middle, as if something with enormous strength had simply grabbed them and bent them until they cracked. The pieces were arranged in an X on the porch, deliberate and mocking. I stared at them, and something broke in my chest. Not panic. Rage. Pure, hot, clarifying rage. "Fuck you!" I screamed at the forest, at the trees, at whatever was out there watching. "Fuck you!" My voice echoed and died. The forest didn't answer. I was breathing hard, fists clenched, and I realized I was crying. When had I started crying? I wiped my face with my sleeve and forced myself to think. No car, no skis, no phone. 5 miles through deep snow in sub-zero temperature. I could try to walk it, but it would take hours, and I'd be exposed the entire time. Or I could stay here in the cabin and wait for... what? For someone to check on me? Morgan wouldn't worry for another 3 days. The cabin owner had no reason to visit. A rock hit the cabin wall with a boom that made me jump. I spun around, heart in my throat. Another rock, fist-sized gray granite, lay in the snow, where it had bounced off the logs. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. Another rock. This one hit the roof, then rolled down to crash into the snow pile by the porch. It was throwing rocks, in broad daylight, testing me. Another impact, closer to the door. Then another hitting the broken loft window. Glass tinkled as what remained of the pane shattered inward. I ran inside and slammed the door, through both locks. Through the window, I watched more rocks arc from the forest. Watched them hit the cabin with deliberate precision. One hit the door so hard the hinges rattled. Another crashed through the kitchen window in an explosion of glass. The bombardment continued for 5 minutes. 10. Then stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard footsteps, heavy, circling, coming closer to the cabin walls, then ramming. The first impact nearly knocked me off my feet. Something huge and powerful had thrown itself against the north wall, and I heard wood crack. Another impact on the east wall, then the west. It was testing the structure, finding weak points. Boom. The door shuddered in its frame. Boom. The door hinges bent visibly. I stumbled to the kitchen and grabbed the knife block, dumped all the knives on the table. The biggest one, an 8-inch chef's knife, went in my hand. Bear spray in my pocket. My backpack was by the couch. I grabbed it and dumped out everything except essentials. Flashlight, matches, emergency blanket, protein bars. The ramming continued. Methodical. Patient. This thing wasn't mindless. It was wearing down the cabin's defenses, preparing for nightfall. Because it knew. It knew that in the dark I had no advantage. It knew I couldn't run. It knew I was trapped. I found the axe in the closet where I'd seen it on my first day. Firewood axe, heavy head, hickory handle. I picked it up, and the weight of it felt right in my hands, real, solid. If this thing was going to kill me, I wasn't going down without a fight. The ramming stopped around 2 p.m. I stood in the kitchen with the axe, waiting, breathing too hard. My watch showed 2:17, then 2:45, then 3 o'clock. Outside, the light was already failing. In winter this far north, sunset came by 4:30. I had maybe 90 minutes of daylight left. At 3:30, I heard it moving around the cabin again. Slower now. Deliberate. I tracked the sound from window to window and caught a glimpse through the kitchen glass. A dark shape. Massive. Moving on all fours now instead of upright. It was preparing for something. At 4:15, as dusk settled over the forest like a blanket, I heard it climb onto the roof. The metal groaned under its weight. I stood in the main room, axe in both hands, staring at the ceiling. Dust drifted down from the beams. The wood stove radiated heat that suddenly felt inadequate against the cold, pressing in from all sides. I heard it move to the back of the cabin, to the broken loft window, and then I heard it drop inside. The sound of it landing in the loft was wet and heavy. I raised the axe, legs wide, trying to remember everything I'd ever learned about fighting, which was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would help against what was up there. I heard claws on the loft floor. Heard that breathing again, deep and deliberate. Then I saw its head appear over the loft railing. The face. That terrible, impossible face, staring down at me with eyes that caught the wood stove's light and threw it back golden green. Then it vaulted over the railing and dropped to the main floor. I saw it completely for the first time. 8 feet tall, maybe taller, when it straightened to its full height. Emaciated body covered in matted dark fur, gray-black skin showing through in patches where the flare had burned. Arms that hung to its knees, ending in those clawed hands. Legs bent wrong, like a dog's hind legs but supporting an upright frame. And that face, elongated snout, 2 large eyes, mouth full of yellow teeth that didn't fit together right when it closed its jaws. Skin stretched over bone like shrink wrap. Something behind those eyes that was worse than any animal awareness I'd ever seen. We stared at each other across 10 feet of cabin floor. The fire had changed something. Its patience was gone. Maybe the flames had hurt it worse than I thought. Or maybe I'd finally crossed some line its predator brain couldn't ignore. Then it lunged. I sprayed the bear spray, finger mashing the trigger, and orange mist filled the space between us. The creature hit the cloud and shrieked. That same unearthly sound from last night. But it didn't stop. It crashed into me and we went down together. I felt its weight, its strength, the reality of it more horrible than any distant sighting. Its breath was hot and rotten on my face. Claws raked across my shoulder and I screamed, brought the axe up between us and swung blind. The blade connected with something solid. The creature howled and reared back, and I saw blackish blood streaming from a wound in its shoulder. Saw the axe blade coated in that dark fluid that smelled like ammonia and rot and death. I scrambled backward, lost my grip on the axe, and it stayed embedded in the creature's shoulder. The creature reached up with one long arm and pulled the axe free like it was a splinter, dropped it on the floor with a clang. The wound bled but didn't slow it down. It came at me again, and I grabbed the chef's knife from where it had fallen and slashed wildly. The blade caught its arm and cut deep, but the creature barely flinched. It grabbed my wrist. The grip was freezing cold and impossibly strong, and squeezed until I felt bones grind together. I dropped the knife and did the only thing I could think of. Earlier that day, I'd brought the kerosene can inside from the shed, planning to refill the backup heater. It sat by the door where I'd left it. I dove for it, ripping off the cap, and sloshed kerosene across the floor between us. The creature's attention snapped to the spreading pool, then back to me. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the stove, hooked a burning log from the open door, and flung it into the kerosene. The world became fire. Flames erupted across the floor in a wave of heat and light that forced the creature back. It shrieked again, arms raised, and I saw the fire catch in its fur a second time. The kerosene was spreading, igniting the cabin's wooden floor, and smoke filled the room in choking clouds. The kerosene had splashed my right hand when I'd sloshed it. Now the skin was blistering where the flames had touched. Pain distant behind the adrenaline. I worked the door with my left, fingers clumsy but functional. I grabbed my backpack, stumbled to the front door, through the locks. Behind me, the creature was thrashing, trying to escape the flames. I didn't look back. I yanked the door open and ran into the winter night. The cold hit like a wall after the heat of the fire. I ran across the clearing, my burned hand screaming pain signals my brain was ignoring, and hit the tree line at full sprint. Behind me, I heard the creature crash through the cabin's back wall, heard its howl of rage echo through the forest. I ran east, toward the neighbor's cabin, 5 miles through deep snow in the dark. I had my headlamp. I clicked it on, and the beam illuminated snow and trees and shadows that moved wrong. My breath came in gasps that burned my lungs. The cold was already finding its way through my layers, seeking skin, promising death. Behind me, I heard pursuit. The sound of something large crashing through underbrush. Sometimes close, too close, close enough that I could hear its breathing over my own. Sometimes distant, as if it was pacing me, hurting me, playing. I ran for an eternity. My legs were lead weights. My lungs were torn tissue. The burn on my hand had gone past pain into something numb and terrible. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because every time I thought I couldn't take another step, I'd hear that breathing behind me, or the snap of a branch, or that horrible vocalization calling through the trees. The moon was bright enough to see by once I left my headlamp off to save battery. The snow reflected the moonlight and turned the forest into a black and white nightmare of shadows and silver. I followed the creek drainage, stumbling over rocks hidden under snow, falling twice and forcing myself back up. I stopped checking my watch after the first hour. Looking down meant slowing down, and slowing down meant dying. The cold bit through my clothes, and my burned hand screamed whenever I stumbled and caught myself. By the time I saw lights through the trees, I was hypothermic and barely conscious. My watch showed 7:43 p.m. when I saw lights ahead. At first I thought I was hallucinating. But no, there, through the trees, warm yellow light from windows, the neighbor's cabin, the lodge, salvation. I ran the last 100 yards on pure will, burst from the tree line into a cleared yard, and fell against the front door. My fists pounded wood. Help! My voice was a croak. Please, help me! The door opened and light spilled out, and I saw an elderly couple, man with white beard, woman with concerned eyes, staring down at me. Behind them was warmth and safety and humanity. Please, I said again, and collapsed across the threshold. They caught me before I hit the ground. The woman was saying something about hypothermia, about getting me warm. The man was looking past me into the forest, and his face was grim. It followed you, he said quietly. I turned to look. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the light's reach, I saw a shape. Tall, bent forward, watching. The man pulled me inside and shut the door, locked it. Multiple locks, I noticed, heavy deadbolts that looked recent. We know, the woman said, helping me to a chair by their fireplace. We've lived here 30 years. We know what's out there. I stared at them, shivering violently, unable to speak. The man crossed to the window and looked out. It won't come closer. Never does when there's lights and people, but it'll wait. What is it? I managed through chattering teeth. The couple exchanged a look. Then the woman brought me a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders with practiced care. We call it the thing in the woods, she said softly. It's been here longer than us. Longer than anyone. It comes every few years, always in winter, always picks someone alone. You're lucky, the man said, still watching the window. Most people it picks don't make it here. I looked at my burned hand, my torn shoulder, my snow-soaked clothes. Lucky. Right. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was alive. Outside at the edge of the clearing, the thing in the woods watched and waited, patient, knowing. And I knew with terrible certainty that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The couple, Harold and Marge Lindgren, I learned their names later, kept me at their lodge until the next afternoon. They dressed my wounds, fed me hot soup, and let me exist in the warmth of their home while my nervous system slowly accepted that I wasn't going to die. Harold kept watch by the windows all night, a shotgun across his knees. Around 3 a.m, Harold told me about the others. Hikers who'd stumbled out of the woods over the years, and the ones who never made it out at all. Missing persons cases that went cold. Families left wondering. It's been here longer than any of us, he said. Longer than the cabins, longer than the trail. We're the visitors we just forgot. The deputy who came the next morning looked at my injuries with polite skepticism. I told him a wild animal had attacked the cabin. What else could I say? He'd have called for a psych evaluation. Morgan picked me up in Grand Marais after a frantic drive from Duluth. Saw my bandaged hand, my hollow eyes, the way I flinched at every sound. We drove to Minneapolis that night. I couldn't go back to Duluth. Couldn't be anywhere near those endless miles of forest. I've been here ever since. 14 months now. Morgan and I broke up 3 months after that night. The person they'd loved, confident, rational, skeptical, was gone. In my place was someone who couldn't sleep without the lights on, who flinched at every unexpected touch, who spent nights staring out windows waiting for something to stare back. I don't know how to reach you anymore, Morgan said the night we ended it. It's like you're still in those woods, like part of you never came back. They weren't wrong. I moved into a 3rd-floor apartment 6 months ago. No trees within 50 feet of any window, neighbors on all sides. The constant noise of the city as proof I'm not alone. I gave up IT consulting. I work at a hardware store now, day shifts only, surrounded by fluorescent lights and people. The money is less than half what I used to make. I don't care. The worst part isn't the fear, though. The worst part is the doubt. 14 months of distance have done strange things to my memory. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm not sure anymore. Not sure what was real and what my terrified brain invented. Not sure if the creature I saw was actually what I remember or something my mind constructed from fear and exhaustion and the profound isolation of that cabin. The human brain is fallible. I know this. I used to lecture people about it in forum posts, about how eyewitness testimony is unreliable, about how our pattern recognition software fills in gaps with whatever makes sense. Now I'm the eyewitness, and I understand why people doubted. I have the recording on my phone, the video with the static during the sounds, and sometimes I play it just to remind myself that something happened, that I'm not crazy, that there was evidence, even if that evidence raises more questions than it answers. The audio captured everything, the breathing, the scratching, those terrible vocalizations. But the video shows nothing but static whenever the sounds occur. I've had 3 different tech people look at it, and none of them can explain the interference pattern. One suggested electromagnetic anomalies. Another suggested the file was corrupted. The third just shook his head and handed my phone back without comment. I found others online, forums and message boards and private groups full of people who've seen similar things. Creatures that walk on 2 legs in the deep woods, that display intelligence and intention, that seem to choose their targets deliberately. The stories are remarkably consistent, spanning decades and continents. People who were skeptics before, rational people, practical people, people like me. The community calls them different names depending on the region. Dogman, Beast of Bray Road, Werewolf. I don't know what to call what I saw. I just know it was real. These online communities have become my lifeline, in a way. Not because talking about it helps. It doesn't, not really. But because being around people who believe me, who don't look at me like I'm having a breakdown, makes me feel less alone. There's a woman in Wisconsin who had an encounter in 2019, and we message each other sometimes when the nights get bad. There's a retired forest ranger in Michigan who's been collecting reports for 30 years. There's a whole network of us scattered across the country, all carrying the same weight, all trying to warn others without sounding insane. I went back to the Lingrens lodge exactly once this past October. Drove up during the day, stayed in my car at the edge of their property, just looking at the tree line where I'd emerged that night. The leaves were changing, reds and golds and oranges that should have been beautiful, but just made me think of fire, of the cabin burning, of the creature watching with flames reflected in its eyes. Harold came out to greet me, recognized me immediately, despite the weight I've lost and the gray that spread through my hair. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "It's still out there," he said, leaning against my car door. "Saw tracks last week. Fresh ones, near the old Nordstrom cabin site." He paused, squinted at the forest. "Or what's left of it. Fire took most of the structure. They're not rebuilding." I asked him why he stayed, why he and Marge continued to live out here, knowing what was in those woods. He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to help the ones who make it out like you did, and someone needs to remember the ones who don't." Before I left, Marge came out with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of cookies she'd baked that morning. She hugged me the first time anyone had hugged me without me flinching in months, and told me I was welcome back any time. "You survived," she said. "That means something. Don't let it take any more from you than it already has." I drove back to Minneapolis that afternoon and haven't returned since. But I think about them often, Harold and Marge, keeping their vigil in those woods, helping survivors and remembering the lost. They're braver than I am. They've found a way to live with the knowledge, to turn it into purpose. I'm still just trying to get through each day without falling apart. I still dream about it. Not every night anymore, but often enough. In the dreams, I'm always back in that loft bedroom, always seeing that face pressed against the glass, always frozen in that moment of recognition before the claw drags down the window. Sometimes the dream changes and I don't fire the flare gun in time. Sometimes the cabin doesn't burn. Sometimes I don't make it to the Lingrens lodge, and I'm still out there in the snow, running through darkness that never ends, while something patient follows just behind me, close enough to hear its breath, close enough to smell that chemical wrongness. I wake up from those dreams, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and I lie in my Minneapolis apartment, listening to traffic and sirens and the sounds of a city that never truly sleeps. The noise used to bother me when I first moved here. Now I find it comforting. Proof of humanity, proof of civilization, proof that I'm not alone in the dark. I've learned to use the sounds as grounding. When the panic rises, I count the cars passing on the street below, listen for the rumble of the bus, focus on the television bleeding through the wall from my neighbor's apartment. Real sounds, human sounds, sounds that mean I'm here, in the city, far from those woods. My family knows something happened, but not the full truth. My parents think I had a nervous breakdown after a fire, that I'm recovering from trauma that doesn't need to be examined too closely. My sister visited once and spent the whole weekend watching me with worried eyes, asking gentle questions I couldn't answer. I've become skilled at deflection, at changing the subject, at pretending the person I used to be still exists somewhere inside this shell. I don't know what that creature was. I don't know why it chose me, why it spent a week testing and watching and waiting before it finally tried to get inside. I don't know if it's still up there on the Gunflint Trail, circling other cabins, choosing other victims. I don't know if there are more of them, scattered across the wilderness areas of this country, watching and waiting in the spaces between human settlements. What I do know is this: the woods are not empty. The darkness holds things that don't appear in any field guide, that don't follow any rules of biology I understand. And somewhere in the forests of northern Minnesota, something remembers me. Something watched me escape. Something is patient and intelligent and still out there. I'm writing this from my apartment in Minneapolis, watching snow fall past my third-floor window. The cursor blinks, waiting. And I keep thinking about what Harold said, about someone needing to remember, about what Marge said, about not letting it take any more than it already has. So I'm remembering. I'm telling you what happened to me in January 2024 in a cabin on the Gunflint Trail, because someone needs to know. Because if you're planning a winter getaway to some remote location, some isolated cabin in the deep woods, you deserve to understand what might be out there watching. Because the person I was before, the smug skeptic who mocked eyewitness accounts and dismissed the supernatural, that person needed to hear this story, needed to know that the world is bigger and stranger and more dangerous than any of us want to believe. Be careful. Stay in groups. Keep the lights on. Trust your instincts. When they tell you something is wrong, even if you can't explain why. And if you hear something circling your cabin in the dark, something too heavy and too deliberate to be any animal you recognize, don't wait as long as I did to run.